Although experienced teachers, or even teachers who've been teaching just maybe 1 or 2 years think, I've been doing it now for a while, and they do their lesson plans. For an experienced teacher, that's not necessarily a problem. Why? Years of practice and knowledge and experience. But for an inexperienced teacher, they may learn from experienced teachers and think, I know what I'm doing, and do their lesson plan, do it in their head. But what's going to happen? Are they ready to put their lesson plan just in their head and think about it? Also, those of you who do a lesson plan and you have it planned in your head, do you ever forget something?
Yes,
Yeah.
Sure. Do you ever end up spending too much time with one thing and not enough time on the other?
Sometimes.
So no matter which approach, if you're training teachers that have been teaching a while, you may change your way of training a little bit. Or you're teaching inexperienced teachers, you may train them in a little bit different way. However, the end result, what's important with lesson planning is doing it solid on paper and writing it down, or in the computer. Writing it down, making notes, working through it, thinking about it. After you do this sometime, do you have to do the same work every time? No, it gets easier. And by lesson planning, another thing to convince teachers as you first start is this: lesson planning takes time. The excuse teachers say is, I don't have time to write out a full lesson plan. But we know as an experienced teacher, having a good plan for your class will actually save you time later down the road. And to introduce the idea, to start, it's not in the book, but I think it's important to talk about, which is goals versus objectives. What is the difference between a goal and an objective?
The goal, the thing that you want to reach, and the objectives are
The things that
the purpose behind reaching these goals.
Yeah, it's kind of where you want to go, and the objectives are the steps to get there. Very nice. And we can think of goals as long-term ideas, and they are general. Objectives are thinking more the short term, and they are specific. I'll give an example. A goal. Improve the ability of the students to speak in public. To give a public speech. So, improve the ability of the students to speak in public. This is a goal. How can we measure that? How can we look at what the students have done and said, yes, their ability's better?
By testing them.
We can test them, but we have to look at, to really be able to do it, we have to look at the steps, right? We can't with a goal. A goal cannot be easily measured because you don't have things to count. There's no, we can say quantify, put it in number terms. We don't have the steps. How can we take a goal and make it an objective that's something easy to measure? We give specific information. So, we move from a goal to an objective by saying, the students will give 5 speeches. This is like a plan for the semester, or for the year maybe. We'll give 5 speeches about different topics. And then we might have, they will give one speech, an informational speech. And a persuasive. And then, of course, 3 more, 5. Look at the difference here. You have the number of speeches that the students will do. You can count. Have they made these steps to improve? You can also look at how they scored. Okay, so the student has done the informational speech, and he scored a B on the speech. He did the persuasive speech, he scored a C+. But we can see they scored passing grades on these pieces, it's countable, it's objective. It makes things, one, fair for the students, because you can show the students why you're failing is because you haven't met these objectives that we have. Or why you're passing, why you've done well as you can. So, goals and objectives. The important thing to teachers need to be instructed this, because some books over-explain it, some books under-explain it, some books give bad examples. And the other thing is, different disciplines have different approaches to goals and objectives. If you're working in the sciences, you may have more defined objectives in what you're going to teach. When we talk about language teaching, this is the general idea, goal and objective. Now in a lesson plan, what's the most important part?
Objectives.
The objectives, because it's what you're dealing with in the classroom for that day for the lesson. Now, so we go from that, goals and objectives, and we move on to how to plan a lesson. When we're planning a lesson, we need to consider a few things. Number one, a teacher needs to think about, before writing it out, the purpose of the lesson, which relates to the objectives. Also, the interest and motivation. How are you going to get the students interested? How are you going to motivate those students? That part of the lesson plan usually is in the setup. What are you going to how are you going to warm up the students? How are you going to introduce the topic? Because if you introduce the topic well, you catch their attention like a fish. You hook them. So this is, although you need to think about it in other parts, the setup is mostly interest and motivation. Then of course the enjoyment. Students need to enjoy what they're doing. That doesn't mean it has to be playing fun and games. If you have medical students that are studying English for medical reasons, and you give them a lot of words that are going to be useful for them as a doctor, will they enjoy the class? Yeah, so it can be very serious and still have enjoyment for the students. So enjoyment, that talks about the activities and maybe some of the content that you use in the class. And the other thing that's the most important of all of these, though, is the lesson practical for that class? And I don't mean just the school, I mean the class, because you can have a class, as we all know. Same classroom, same walls, same windows, same chairs, same teacher, same textbook, different students, totally different feel in the classroom. Because from student to student and class to class, you'll have a different environment. And you have to think about that for your planning of the lesson. So things like classroom environment is important. The materials. Do your materials fit your class? Huge mistake is made with materials. It's also, you can think of it, it's common sense, of course. So teachers take a lot of time making flashcards for their students, and they hold up their flashcards and they say, okay, what is this student's? What about the student who's sitting way back there? He's number 50 in the class. Can he see this? So the teacher had good intentions and good planning and made a mistake with considering the materials in their class. So things like that need to be considered in planning. And also timing and staging. This needs to be done. Staging refers to what steps will you take? What will you present first? What will you do? What's the next? And you can change the order of things. Timing's so important to consider.
How much time will each step take?
How much time will each step take? In one class, something may take 2 minutes. In another class, it may take... Exactly. The other point, I'm just going to run across and ask you, your English classes, how much time do you have? 30 minutes, 40 minutes?
45.
45 minutes. 40.
45.
45.
45. 40.
1.5 hours.
Wow.
90.
So in some teachers have 20 minutes, I've been told. Some teachers in some schools have said 25. In the workshops, I've heard a range. Anywhere from 20 minutes up to an hour and a half.
Yes.
One university teacher said his literature classes are 2 hours long. So there's, even within the same country, even within primary school, you both teach intermediate or intermediate 45, 40 minutes, maybe a 30-minute. And I want why this is important. But your Iraqi opportunities, the curriculum you're teaching, gives you a lesson plan. The lesson plan is in there. And often many other books you use in university have a lesson plan in the teacher's book, right? But does that lesson plan know your students?
No.
No. Does it know your classroom environment? No. So what's important to do with those lesson plans? Modify. Do them by yourself. You can use it as a guide, but it is a guide. It is not something to be followed like a set of rules. It's just a guide. And the teachers say, oh, but I have a very good lesson plan here in my teacher book. I need to follow the lesson plan here. But they're not thinking. That lesson plan may have been written for a class that's 1 hour. Or 45 minutes, you only have 25 minutes. So lesson plans, no matter what is in the book, need to be modified and changed to fit the classroom situation. So that's working with these things, thinking about them before planning a lesson. Yes?
Talking about these factors, I think they are interrelated, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes, I mean, timing affects the classroom environment. I mean, when we talk about, for example, time for the first lecture is different from, I mean, first lecture is different from the, for example, fifth lecture. I change the, I mean, classroom environment. You see, I mean, in the first lecture you may find students are ready and active. You see, so this is, I mean, they are interrelated.
You are 100% right. And timing has to do with interest and motivation, has to do with enjoyment. Too much time on something can kill the motivation. Too little time on something can kill the motivation. So they're all interrelated. It's a very good point. Now, we get into, so we know these things that we have to think about before lesson planning. But what do we do when we lesson plan? What should we do? What should we not do? So we have here, be specific. Avoid general objectives, which means this is a general objective. You can see it's a bad example. The teacher says, we're going to practice listening. Well, what does that mean? You're going to listen to the teacher talk, tell a story, sing a song? Or, look, you can be more specific. A good example of a good objective is listen for key facts in a news report. It's very specific. Now, I need to look at this. We're going to do one on the board here. So, what about an objective like this? Write a short conversation. Not a good objective. It's not specific enough. What do we need to add to this? We need to add the topic, what it's about. So a short conversation about.
A grammatical code or clue.
Exactly. So someone in the last one said picnic. It was a good example. So we'll say write a short conversation about
Shopping.
Cooking food, shopping, shopping, travel. So it's all about travel for the picnic. Okay? So what do we have? Cooking food, preparing the food for the picnic. Shopping, buying the food, buying the things for the picnic. And travel, transportation, getting there. Now we have narrowed it down to some different sets of words the students are going to use in their short conversation. We might also put something like the emotions. How they'll feel about having the picnic.
So we are not asking them to use present continuous.
Now, exactly. We have the topic, we've given them a topic, but now what grammatical features are we going to do? Use the present perfect. Or you could be, Or the future tense. There's so many use, you know. Oh, we have been, you know, we are. All these things, you can choose different grammatical tenses to go, and then you can even tell them, so you're going to use present perfect tense to describe what you're doing, and you're also going to use vocabulary about cooking, shopping, and travel. Now you've given them a set of words they need to use in their conversation they write, a topic they have to write about, and specific grammar they have to practice in the class. This is an excellent objective to put in a lesson plan. Of course, you may have more details that will come with it. Explain, you know, give them an example of what present perfect sentence patterns you want them to follow. But something about this that's very useful, teachers don't think about. With this one, write a short conversation. The students write a conversation and give it to you. How do you grade it? You're going to have to be very subjective in your grading, aren't you? Because you didn't give them any guidelines to follow. If you take the time and you write a good objective, it takes time. However, when you grade their homework, you've just saved yourself a lot of time. Why? You read their dialogue very quickly and you say, do I see cooking, food, shopping, travel? Ooh, they did this, okay, they're good there. Did they use these vocabulary? Yes, they did. Did they use this grammar correctly? Yes, they did. Boom. You've graded their paper. You can explain to the students why they did well, why they didn't do well. You just saved yourself maybe an hour, 2 hours. Also, if you have students that like to argue about your grade, you may have just saved yourself a huge headache as well.
So checklist is of importance here to the teacher.
Yes. Because a good objective gives us a rubric, we could say, guidelines of how to grade what they've done. In end, don't you think that telling a student this is much more fair to them than telling them, oh, write a short conversation?
No, of course, the details will help the students too.
Yeah. So that's when we get here to be specific, that's what it means. With objectives, be specific. Now, the next one is anticipate problems. Now, you're all working with students who speak the same language. This is fantastic. This makes your job much easier. You can predict what tense issues Arabic speakers have. Like, what's a tense that Arabic speakers tend to have a big problem with? I was told in the last group, all of the tenses are a problem for students. So you know you're going to be teaching a tense form. You know they'll have problems with this. So in your lesson plan, you plan more time, more activities to help them understand that point. Pronunciation might be one, and we know the PB, you know, we know they're going to have trouble with B, so we spend more time, maybe a listening exercise, listening to B, a little training with it before we get into those. We focus on those grammatical and learning points. You know the students will have problems. But don't just think of the problem, the key. Think of the solution. So your lesson plan will have the problem you've identified and also the solution to solving it. But also, anticipate problems have to do things like energy problems of the students. Example, students come into the class after lunch, like we all just have. And what do we feel like? We're tired, we're sleepy. So you may want to plan an activity like Kim does in the morning. You get the students up, maybe moving around a little bit, doing something very active. You increase the energy level in the class. The other side, they come in the morning and they're full of energy and they won't shut up. What do? You do an activity that's more passive, that quiets them down and gets them focusing on the class. So you adjust your lesson plan based on the environment you're teaching the students you have, and you anticipate what you're going to face, and you write your plan to plan around, to solve the problems.
How about the teacher? Who's going to solve this problem?
Well, actually, you might say this, okay, in the afternoon, I'm very tired after lunch. Maybe I need to eat less. Maybe I need to have 2 cups of coffee with lunch instead of 1 Pepsi. You know? Things like that. So we can talk about anything. It can be grammar, it can be reading issues, it can be other personality things within the class. Decide timing. The key with timing is until you go into the class and do it, you're not really sure how much time you need. So when you're doing your lesson plan and you're planning, you need to be flexible. You need to plan to be flexible. So I always, when I'm doing a serious lesson plan, I allow a few minutes for adjustments. So I'll plan, if I have a 45-minute class, I'll plan for 40 minutes. Then I have 5 minutes if I go over something, but you also want to plan extra activities. So you reach the end of your class and you're not like, okay, how we doing? You know, and ending early. You want other things to continue. So that way you're safe. If you go over, you have a few minutes. If you go under, you're okay. You don't look like a fool. And you don't... Have any of you run out of time at the end of a lesson and you're finished, but you have 5-10 more minutes?
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you do if you don't have anything planned?
Okay, let's
Tell
read
them
more.
I'm joking.
I have to make the students so busy, like giving them games, standing and sitting. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And if you don't plan for it, you have to think on your feet.
Now let us comment on those who didn't understand the lecture well. What's your problem? What's your questions?
So as a teacher, this will happen to you at some time in your job. Even if you teach only 1 year, it'll at least happen once. So you plan that in your lesson planning. You think about it. Also, avoid too many details in your lesson plan. Notice mine, this is for 90 minutes. It's only a page and a half, and I have a lot of space. Why? In your lesson, you don't have time to read the details. So you keep them simple. Keep them simple. And then the last one, which is worth talking about, is file. That means keep your lesson plans and share your plans. For the teachers you're training, this is a big one. How many of you have lesson plans that you used last year that you've kept? Wow. A couple? A couple? Okay. What about from 2 years ago?
What about May and
3 years ago?
I wasn't teaching that. I was keeping them all the
Yeah.
time.
So some teachers share them, but a lot of teachers don't. Here's a few reasons. This is what you talk to trainees, teachers you're training about why. One, are any of you supervisors?
No.
No.
We had a supervisor in the last
You
class.
know, the policy of the Education Ministry, this year we have been told that at the end of the year you have to give us your planning notebooks to make sure that the next year you will do it again, not just depending on this.
Okay.
It should be to be written
Just
again.
make a copy and keep
Yeah. So you should make a copy of your lesson. Keep it for sure.
We solve it, sorry.
There's a few things. Imagine you have a supervisor come and watches your class and they say, I want to see your lesson plan. And you pull out a notebook and say, here's 4 months worth of lesson plans. What is your supervisor's impression of you going to be?
You are very active.
You're a hard worker, you're accurate, you're smart, you're keeping track, you're on the ball, you're a good teacher. And they're less likely to give you trouble. And when it's time for promotion, maybe you'll be thought of because you made an impression. So one, it looks good. Rather than giving excuses, oh, I left it at home. No, you have it with you, you keep it. Filing. Also, the next year, you can use it again. Of course, modify a little bit. But you've done it before, you have a record. Will you remember, okay, September 12th, 2008, what did you do in your class? There's no way you'll remember. But if you have it in your book, you can look it up and say, okay, that's exactly what I did. I'll change this. I just saved myself a lot of work.
Yes, please. At a university level, sometimes, lecturers are not teaching the same material. every year there is a new material and there is a plan for each material. So you cannot expect that a lecturer has, I mean, a plan for 3 years or 4 years.
No, but let me give you an example. That's exactly what I teach in the university, and I switch classes all the time.
Yeah.
However, you teach a class 3 years ago, and now suddenly you've been assigned to teach a class very similar. If you didn't keep your notes from 3 years ago, what are you doing now? You're starting all over again. Had you kept the notebook and just kept it somewhere safe, you just saved yourself a lot of time.
Yes, of course we keep the notes, you see, but you see we are changing, you see. We are changing the, I mean, the materials.
And I'll give you another reason
kind of
is,
updating.
what I do, I teach I teach English classes, but I also teach intercultural communication at another college. And at that college, that book had changed 1 year, and the next year was a new book. However, from my lesson plans from the year before, I had a lot of activities I was able to use. So I didn't use the whole plan, but I used parts.
Yes.
And it was very useful.
The same thing, because you see, at the university, sometimes you teach non-departmental, you see, those are different, you see. So, I mean, for 1 year you teach those who are, in history department. Then you move, yes, well, you move to mathematics, then you move to physics. Each of which, I mean, has its own, has its own text, you see, all these things are different.
But it doesn't mean that something you did here may not help you later.
Not totally different, you see.
Exactly.
Yes, there are some
modifications.
Yes,
The general steps are one.
yes, the general steps are
Yeah.
one.
So this is and think as an experienced teacher, you're more likely to remember the things that you did, but for teachers you're training, they may not be there. They may not be ready to do that yet. The other thing is, teach teachers to share their plans with each other. Have you ever run into teachers that are like, it's my lesson plan, it's mine, and I did the work and you can't see it? Well, one, this is very selfish, but some people, I understand. However, it's not smart. One, we all get sick sometimes. We all feel bad. We all have family things that happen, and we don't have time to do a good lesson plan. If you're sharing your plans and you have a buddy, and you say, you know what, today I'm really not sure what I'm going to do with this lesson. Can you give me some ideas? And you share with each other, you're getting help. Now, it's like Shane taught you, you know, individually we are a drop, but together we are an ocean. But really, when it comes to this is so true. Now you have a friend, you have people you can count on to help you, but also, when they need help, you're there to help them. And it's not like you have to do a lot of work, you have your lesson plans in your book. So this is something, some teachers get stingy with their lesson plans, but you have to break them of being stingy. Don't be afraid. Share them. Help each other. This is the smart thing to do. It makes our lives easier. So these are our do's and don'ts. And again, these are in the chapter too. So if you, a year from now, are doing a training, you can read the chapter and review, and you will see these things there. But they all make sense, don't they?
We took pictures, so I'm going to follow.
Also, these will be turned into PowerPoint, and you'll be able to download them from the Iraqi ESL website as well. You'll just have to wait. When I get back to America, I will do it.
What do you think, how much time you need to be in a PowerPoint?
I already have half of them done.
I will be stingy.
And the PowerPoints you're free to use. You can even change them and put your name on it and say
No. I'll make a credit.
So the next is lesson planning strategy. There are a few different approaches. By the way, we just have two more points, and then you're going to be doing lesson plans. With lesson planning strategies, the classic approach for communicative language teaching, but not just communicative, but even in presenting content, teaching literature, teaching culture, teaching ESP, linguistics, follow similar ideas to this. We have PPP, which is presentation, practice, production. Arose by another name is still arose. Pre-task, task, post-task. It's the same thing.
Also, it's like it's presentation, imitation, and production.
They really are the same thing. It's a different labels on the same idea. Presentation is where it's usually teacher to student, although it may be student to student. It's where the teacher is teaching. Setup. It's the setup, giving them the structures they're going to follow, giving the explanation. Now, presentation should be how long?
10 minutes or 15.
Should be short. I mean, maybe 10, if you have 90 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is short. But presentation should be a short amount of time. And in planning, this is important to focus on and talk to teachers about because, I'm just going to, if you plan a long time, so presentation, and now you plan 10 minutes. But you're limited, you have 40 minutes for your class. Now you get to the practice part. And the students are doing practice, and they're student to student, and you're listening, and you're monitoring, and you notice, oh, guys, you stink. Not meaning literally stink, but they're doing very poorly. A bad job. What do? Now you spent 10 minutes explaining, you go back and do it, present some more, you're just taking up 20 minutes for something that you planned 15 minutes for, maybe 25. If you keep this short, you present, let them try. Keep this 5 minutes, maybe shorter. You present quickly, you get them, go practice, you plan 10 minutes for practice. Now what happens? They're doing practice, you notice, ooh, problems. You're making mistakes. You can always go back and present again to help correct their mistakes. But if you spent 10 minutes lecturing or 15 minutes lecturing and introducing, and now you notice you have 15 minutes left in class and they're doing a horrible job, you don't have much time to go back and review. You've just killed it. So you should keep presentation, it should be the short part of your lesson, but be ready to make it longer if you need to. Okay. Plan short, but be ready to make it a little bit longer. Practice, think about when we talked about speaking. They had restricted oral practice. They're following a pattern. They're following specific dialogues maybe, substitution plans, substitution tables, and they're talking and they're practicing, and you focus on accuracy. You correct the students. You get teacher to student. Say the problem is you're using subject-verb agreement, and you listen to them, and you get this a lot. He lived in Ramadi. He lived in Los Angeles. Oh, okay, students. In practice, you practice form, you can correct them. Hey, let's do this correctly. What should we say? He live or he lives? Exactly. We need to get this sound here. He lives. He lives. And then you practice with them and focus. So that's practice. And then we get to production stage, student to student. That doesn't mean, the teacher can be active and go and talk to the students too. But in that case, the teacher's playing the same role that the students are playing. So the student to student doesn't mean the teacher's sitting there going, no. The teacher's being a student too, and interacting with the students and monitoring. Exactly. Monitoring and watching. There's production, that's the fluency stage. At production stage, do you want to be correcting their mistakes?
No.
Very limitedly. Only if it's really something that needs to be corrected right then. But in general, you let them produce the language. If you notice, this is very common, textbooks use this. I want to show you an example. This is this. Okay. And okay, this will work. If you notice here, in interchange that you've been using, snapshot right here. This section, what is this?
Presentation.
This is really a presentation. It's presenting words. It's giving some different information. Perspectives, here they're reading. This is also a form of presentation. You get some presentation. Then it moves on to some production, some practice, following the forms for intonation. What do we get next? Oh, now it's getting into more practice. We're moving into more practice stuff, following forms, and what does it build up to? Writing. a fluency exercise. Conversation, a fluency exercise. This book is following a presentation, practice, production format. But there are other parts in the book where it's doing something a little bit different. What it's doing there that's a little bit different is kind of these ideas.
I'm sorry
Yeah.
for interruption. I have a question.
No
In a
problem.
presentation, in the rack opportunities, there is activity, it's called before you start. Is it a matter of being a presentation or a production or a practice? What kind of activity can you...
Well, I'll say that's kind of a warm-up.
Yeah.
Before you start is kind of warm-up. That may fall into the new lesson, and it may be presentation, but in some books, and I don't know specifically Iraqi opportunities, some books the warm-up is not meant as something for this lesson, but as a review for ORD lesson. And sometimes it's a review and it's getting the students ready for what's new. The whole idea here is a communicative language idea called I plus 1.
Yeah.
This means I is what the students know. It's the old information,
Yeah.
and the 1 is the new
The new
information.
information.
Notice this isn't I plus 3. This isn't I plus 7. It's
Okay.
I plus 1. Why? Small amounts. Old information, a little new. Old information, a little new. So warm-up is following a similar pattern too. You know, presentation, you're building on old information, presenting a little new information, letting them practice it, moving into production. In any given lesson plan, this right here may be done 3, 4, 5 times.
Sometimes we have a very, for example, large amount of data, so we need to have to use the presentation in between. Sometimes within the body of the lesson.
Exactly. So you have, instead of I plus 7, where you do a lot of presentation and then they're doing 7 points, you do a little bit, you go to practice, production, back to presentation. Sometimes presentation, practice, a repeat, and then you build up to production, putting it all together. All of these patterns are acceptable and useful. Now, another approach that you'll see in the interchange book too, and one of the reasons why interchange is actually a very popular book and a good textbook, it has variety, is this ARC model. All that is authentic use, it's restricted use, which is the same as the practice stage, and it's clarification and focus, which is actually the presentation stage. Things are just moved around in order. Authentic use are communicative activities. It can be a listening, it can be a reading. Don't get mistaken. Authentic doesn't have to necessarily be stuff that was made for native speakers. For instance, in interchange, back to the chapter, we've got, what was the chapter? Something like this, for instance. Here, this reading, this would be considered an authentic materials. Why? It's providing the model, it's providing something for them to work on. What comes after the reading? You get some writing activity, more production. So there's just another example of authentic use. So think of a pattern like the students do a listening, they cover some vocabulary, they've done the listening, they've thought about it. Now you have them follow a pattern, ask some discussion questions about the listening. In the listening chapter, we had the listening exercise and then follow-up activities. All of those follow-up activities are really restricted use. Then, during restricted use, the teacher monitors. They see the problems, then what do? You clarify and focus. Now, clarify and focus is where you're teaching them, oh, no, students, while you did that, we noticed you were making mistakes here. Let's review again. We could say that this kind of approach is very economical. It's time-saving. Why? Instead of spending time presenting stuff the students may already know and get and you wasted your time, you're letting the students do something. You're observing where there are problems, you teach that. That way you're not teaching where there aren't problems. This is very useful for more advanced students that kind of learn English very easily. If you're teaching gifted students, where sure, I taught them this is new, but they actually kind of know it because they're smart and they can figure it out. Then you let them figure that out and you move on to the areas where they need help. This, very, very useful. And it's not something that should be skipped. This is the classic. This is safe. This is something a little bit different. You're really just changing the order around. Save a little time though. This one is very similar. Test, teach, test. Test does not mean give like a classic test. Test means to give an activity. You watch them. You see, okay, they had their problems. Here's where they had the problem. Then you teach them. Then you give them another activity. You watch. Oh, now their problem's not here, but there's still a problem here. So you go back and you teach them there. Then you give them another activity. And you just see, okay, now we've mastered it. Once they've mastered those things, you move on to the next lesson. The important, why this is presenting is to show a teacher, you don't have to be stuck here in this order. You might come back, as I pointed out, you may come back and do presentation again. Here, look at this order. Presentation's coming at the end. You may come back and present at the end to clarify and make things perfect. You may do a little bit here, you may do it in the middle, and then do another activity. If you notice, the key is monitoring with these right here. Monitoring and doing it. So any lesson plan can be mixed up. Things can be turned around. You might start different places and try a different approach. Perfectly acceptable. And it makes for an interesting class because it's variety. So do you have any questions about some of this? And it's explained very well in the book, I think. Last part. Lesson plans. How do we do it? Let's turn to page 300. It's chapter 19, and we want to look at page 316. With a lesson plan, a good lesson plan, where it's written down, we have two parts. One deals with planning out what the content is, what are the objectives, overall what are the details of the lesson. And then the next part is dealing with the procedures, what you're going to do, okay? How you're going to present. With the content, we have, these are the main important parts with the content part of the lesson plan. Learning objectives, we've talked about those. Learning objectives are about the students. What the students are going to do in class. What you're going to teach the students. Then we have personal teaching objectives. This is a concept that's very new to a lot of teachers. Not in Iraq, everywhere. What teaching objectives have to do with what the teacher does in the classroom to teach. Personal teaching objectives have to do with what the teacher is going to do in the classroom to try to perfect their art. Think of as the teacher as an artist. This time I want to paint a painting more beautiful than the last painting I painted. What can I do differently to do a better job? That's personal teaching objective. Let me give you some examples of some good personal teaching objectives. I have taught this workshop the third time now. The first time, my posters were pretty pathetic. They were sad because I made them while I taught. So one, my classes went slower because I was having to write all of this stuff. Then after a few days, I realized I need to make my posters first. So then I started doing it before class. But they were still kind of messy, and I realized, oh, I added this, I took away this, I didn't need this. Second workshop, much better with my posters. My personal teaching objective for this workshop is to make the posters even better That's why today, these were all new. I wrote them this morning. Okay? The ones I had before had gotten wrinkled, they'd gotten written on, they weren't as nice. So there's one example.
So we are lucky. We are lucky.
Yeah, you could say that, maybe.
The last workshop will be the luckiest. Huh?
Maybe. Or maybe by that time I'll be so tired. Another one might be, say a teacher is reading a story to their students and says, my pronunciation, last time I read a story, my pronunciation was not very clear. So their personal objective is to read the story as clear as possible, to highlight the key vocabulary well and pronounce them nicely so the students are happy and can really understand what I'm saying and reading to them and have a good model. That's a good personal teaching objective. What I say is some teachers, in the last workshop there was a teacher who made the comment, but I've been teaching for 25 years. I'm a good teacher. Does someone who's been teaching for 25 years still not need to improve from one day to another?
No.
No, because we're not perfect. And two, we always have new students. So this does not mean you're not a good teacher. It doesn't mean something that you did poorly. It means maybe these students are a little bit special. They're not like my class last year. I need to teach them a little bit differently. Maybe it's special in a good way. Maybe it's special in a
bad way.
You know, where they're just not as smart. Either way, you can, as a teacher, say, what do I need to do differently so I teach them well? I think this is one of the most important parts of a teaching lesson because it's where the teacher actually thinks about what they're doing and how good they are at doing it. Next, vocabulary pronunciation. Every lesson is going to have key vocabulary, pronunciation parts. Now, sometimes this will be included in the learning objectives. Sometimes your objectives will say what vocabulary you are. Other times you may want to focus on those words. Anticipated knowledge and problem, we talk about that. Figure out where it's going to be difficult, plan around it, and have a solution. And last, consider your materials and are they appropriate. And then, on the procedure part, let's turn to page 318, just for a moment. Now this is the procedure part. We have procedures, so the teacher plans out the first thing they're going to do, second, third, fourth. They have a warm-up. This is exactly what they're going to do. Then notice, they planned the amount of time. They've planned what's the interaction. This is student-to-student interaction. By the way, this lesson plan is following an ARC sort of pattern. Because of getting the students to kind of do an authentic activity, then the teacher monitors. Now, we tie it with this. There's procedures, timing, interaction, and then this is very important. This is the objective that this is for. This part gets forgotten a lot on lesson plans. Teachers forget to say, why am I doing this? Then they may get in the class, do the activity, and not focus on the right part, and skip it. So it's always important to remember, this is for this objective, and you write it down. Notice in her objectives here, I say her because it was a woman's name on the front. But she says, I will allow you to find how much the students actually remember. What does that mean? She's monitoring. During this activity, she actually has that built in to the lesson. So this is procedures, timing, interaction, and the purpose, the objectives that it's connected to. Let's turn back to page 316. There's just 3 more things I want to point out to you. Oh, perfect. And we're actually ahead of the other group. Example 1, right here, speaking. This one is for speaking practice. You can use it as a model. It's mostly just a speaking lesson. Example 2, we have reading and skills practice for a reading lesson. So if you want to look and try to plan a reading lesson, you can look at this one. And this one, I think, the third one is probably the most useful because it's actually an integrated lesson, looking at listening and doing speaking in a class. And you see the example, and it goes through the procedure. So we have 2 parts. the content part, the procedures part. And here's a plan. Here's a plan for you to follow. I have paper too, so you don't have to write in your book if you want to keep your book nice. And then over here, as you plan a lesson today, I want you to think about 1 through 11. These are checklists. Think about it before you do it, and then when you're finished, go through this list and ask yourself, did I do these things in my lesson? Okay. Now, I want you to not do this lesson plan by yourself. I want you to do it with another partner, or in a group. Or a group. It could be a group of 3, you can be with a partner, you can get up and move and change with another partner. What I want you to do for the lesson, though, to help, it's really just to help you, is choose a lesson in interchange that you have done already with Kim. 2 reasons. 1, you'll have the content in front of you so you can think about it more. And why one that you've done already? You'll be familiar with the content. You've talked about it. You'll be able to plan it better, like a teacher should. Okay? So go ahead. Use interchange. Choose a chapter that you want to use and follow it and do a daily lesson plan with these parts. Now, just in mind, what you're doing today will be day 1 of your weekly lesson plan tomorrow. Okay? So these 2 pieces will work together. Okay? Both the same word, same pronunciation. Both pronunciations are okay. Yes. Some people say data, some people say data.
It's in the dictionary, it's data.
Yeah. Data is just very common too. They're both okay. It's like either. Either, tomato, tomato, you know. Paper. If you need paper, I've got plenty of paper to share. There's some on your tables.